They said silence was survival. They said obedience bought safety. They were wrong. Tonight, Eliza Thornfield would make a choice that would shatter everything: her reputation, her family's carefully constructed lies, and the iron grip of a society that valued appearance over truth. In a ballroom full of vipers dressed in silk, she stood at the edge of her own destruction, holding evidence that could ruin her or set her free. The Duke was watching. Her fiancé was smiling, and she was about to light the match. Stay until the end to see how one woman's courage rewrote the rules of power. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see who's watching from where. The Ashford Estate ballroom dripped with wealth that could feed a village for a year, maybe two. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across marble floors, so polished you could see your lies reflected back at you. Eliza Thornfield stood near a column, champagne glass in hand, watching the performance everyone pretended was real life. "You look radiant tonight, Miss Thornfield." Lord Pemberton appeared at her elbow, his smile practiced to the point of machinery. "Your engagement has brought such joy to our circles." Eliza returned the smile with equal precision. "How kind of you to say." What she didn't say: "You mean my engagement brought profitable connections to your shipping venture and secured my father's political debts." Joy had nothing to do with it. Pemberton drifted away, satisfied with the exchange of hollow pleasantries. This was the game. Stand beautifully, speak emptily, marry strategically, die eventually, having never said one true thing. Across the room, Richard Hastings, her fiancé of 3 months, held court among a cluster of younger lords. He was handsome in that uncomplicated way that photographs well: strong jaw, easy laugh, hair that fell just so when he turned his head. The kind of man mothers pointed out to daughters as eligible, without bothering to mention whether he was decent. "He seems pleased with himself," her sister Margaret murmured, appearing beside her with the stealth of long practice. At 19, Margaret still believed in love matches and happy endings. Eliza had believed in those things too, once, before she'd learned to count the cost of everything. "Richard is always pleased with himself," Eliza replied quietly. "It's one of his more consistent qualities." Margaret's expression flickered with concern. "Eliza, you don't have to—" "I do, actually." Eliza cut her off gently but firmly. "Father made that abundantly clear. The Hastings alliance secures our family's position. My feelings are irrelevant." The word tasted like ash, but it was true. Her father, the distinguished Lord Thornfield, had accumulated gambling debts that threatened to swallow their estate whole. Richard's family had money, new money, the kind that needed the polish of an old name. It was a transaction dressed up as a romance. Margaret opened her mouth to argue, but their mother materialized like a ship changing course, all billowing silk and calculated grace. "Eliza, darling, you're hiding." Lady Thornfield's voice carried the bright sharpness of a well-honed blade. "The Duchess of Somerset wished to congratulate you. Do try to look happier about your good fortune." "Of course, mother." Eliza set down her barely touched champagne and prepared to perform gratitude. But as she turned, her gaze snagged on someone else entirely. Adrian Blackwood stood near the terrace doors, a dark figure against the golden glow of the ballroom. The Duke of Thornhaven wasn't supposed to be here. He rarely attended these gatherings, preferring his northern estates to London's suffocating social circus. Yet here he was, watching the crowd with the detached interest of a scientist observing insects. Their eyes met across the distance. Eliza's breath caught. She looked away quickly, heat climbing her neck. It was absurd, this reaction, childish. She'd harbored feelings for Adrian Blackwood since she was 17, when he'd found her crying in his family's library during a house party, and had simply handed her his handkerchief without asking questions. He'd been 23 then, already carved from ice and control, but for 10 minutes he'd sat with her in silence, and it had meant everything. That was 5 years ago. He'd never mentioned it again. Probably didn't remember it. "The Duke of Thornhaven," her mother noted with cool assessment. "I'm surprised he bothered to attend, though I suppose even he must occasionally pretend to be civilized." Eliza said nothing. Her mother had never approved of Adrian. Too remote, too unconventional, too unwilling to play the social games that kept their world turning. Lady Thornfield preferred men like Richard, charming, malleable, easy to manage. "Come." Her mother's hand closed on Eliza's elbow. "The Duchess is waiting." The next hour blurred into a parade of congratulations that felt more like condolences. Everyone was so pleased about the match. Everyone thought Richard was wonderful. Everyone believed Eliza was lucky. No one asked if she was happy. By the time she escaped to the terrace for air, her face ached from smiling. The night was cool against her skin, late September threatening the approach of winter. She gripped the stone balustrade and let herself have 30 seconds of honesty. She didn't love Richard. She didn't even like him particularly, but love was a luxury for people with choices, and she had none. "You're good at it." Eliza spun around. Adrian Blackwood stood in the terrace doorway, shadows clinging to him like they recognized a kindred spirit. "At what?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Pretending." He stepped onto the terrace, and she noticed he carried 2 glasses of champagne. He offered her one. "You smiled at Pemberton like you didn't know he funded his lifestyle by selling opium to factory workers. You congratulated Lady Morrison on her new bracelet without mentioning her husband bought it with money stolen from his tenants. You've perfected the art of seeing everything and revealing nothing." Eliza took the glass, fingers trembling slightly. "And why would I reveal anything? We all have our roles to play." "Do we?" Adrian moved to stand beside her at the railing, close enough that she could smell cedar and smoke on him. "Or do we just tell ourselves that to avoid the discomfort of honesty? Honesty is expensive, Your Grace. Some of us can't afford it." He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and Eliza felt stripped bare under that dark gaze. Adrian Blackwood didn't do small talk. He didn't do performance. When he focused on you, it was total and unsettling and far too much. "I need to speak with you," he said quietly, privately. "It's important." "We are private." "Not here." His voice dropped further. "Tomorrow. The British Museum, 2nd floor, Greek Antiquities section, 2 o'clock. Eliza's heart hammered. "That's... Your Grace, I can't simply..." "It's about Richard Hastings." Adrian's expression didn't change, but something cold and dangerous flickered in his eyes. "And what you're walking into if you marry him." The terrace door burst open. Richard himself appeared, flushed with wine and good spirits, his friends trailing behind like eager puppies. "There you are, darling." He crossed to Eliza with the confidence of ownership, sliding an arm around her waist. She felt Adrian go absolutely still beside her. "I've been looking everywhere, Blackwood." Richard's greeting held the careful respect of a man addressing his social superior while resenting every word. "Didn't expect to see you at these things." "I had business in London." Adrian's voice was flat, emotionless. "Miss Thornfield, Hastings." He left without another word, disappearing back into the ballroom like smoke. Richard watched him go with poorly concealed dislike. "Cold bastard, isn't he? Though I suppose when you're that rich, you don't need personality." Eliza carefully extracted herself from his grip. "I should return to my mother." "Wait." Richard caught her hand, suddenly serious. His friends had tactfully moved out of earshot. I know our arrangement isn't conventional, but I want you to know I'll be good to you, Eliza. I'll give you everything you need." He meant it as kindness, she could tell, but all she heard was the word need, not want, as if she were a child to be provided for rather than a person with desires of her own. "I know you will, Richard." She squeezed his hand briefly. "Excuse me." She fled before he could say more, before the walls closed in completely. The rest of the evening crawled past. Eliza smiled and nodded and accepted congratulations while her mind spun with questions. What did Adrian know about Richard? Why tell her now? And why did the prospect of meeting him tomorrow fill her with equal parts terror and anticipation? By the time their carriage departed at midnight, she felt wrung out and hollow. "You barely ate anything," Margaret observed as they rode through London's dark streets. Their parents had stayed behind, networking until the bitter end. "Are you unwell?" "Just tired." "Liza." Margaret's hand found hers in the darkness. "If you really don't want to marry him..." "There is no want, Maggie. There's only necessity." Eliza kept her voice gentle but firm. "Father's debts are real. If I don't marry Richard, we lose everything. The house, the land, our position, everything. But you'll be miserable." "I'll be secure. That's more than most women get." Margaret fell silent, and Eliza knew she'd disappointed her. Her sister still believed in fairy tales, that love conquered all, that courage was rewarded, that doing the right thing led to happy endings. Eliza had learned better. She'd learned that survival meant compromise, that safety required sacrifice, and that the only way through was to stop feeling anything at all. But as she prepared for bed that night, brushing out her dark hair and staring at her reflection, Adrian's words echoed in her mind. It's about what you're walking into. She thought of Richard's easy charm, his lavish gifts, the way he commanded a room with that effortless confidence that came from never having been denied anything. And she thought of the rumors she'd dismissed, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, the way certain lords looked uncomfortable when Richard's name came up. She'd told herself it was jealousy, politics, the usual social poison. But what if it wasn't? Eliza climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling, watching shadows dance across plasterwork. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, she would go to the museum. She would hear what Adrian had to say. And then she would make a choice: to trust the devil she was promised to, or the one offering to show her the truth. Sleep, when it finally came, was restless and full of dreams where she stood at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump or turn back to the fire behind her. The morning arrived with gray skies and drizzle. Eliza went through her routine: breakfast with Margaret and Mother, a music lesson she barely focused on, correspondence that required careful, meaningless responses. All the while, the clock ticked toward 2. At 1:30, she told her mother she was going to visit her friend Catherine for tea. "Take Marie with you," Lady Thornfield said absently, focused on her own letters. "It's not proper to go about alone. But Catherine's sending her carriage, and you know how small her drawing room is. Marie would be cramped." It was a calculated lie. Her mother, who valued appearances above all, wouldn't want to appear rude by overcrowding Catherine's space. "Fine, but home by 5. We have dinner with the Hastings tonight." Eliza escaped before more questions could surface. The museum was a 30-minute ride from their Belgravia townhouse. She spent the journey watching London scroll past, grand buildings giving way to parks, giving way to the imposing facade of the British Museum. Inside, the air smelled of old stone and scholarship. Tourists and students wandered the halls, voices echoing off high ceilings. Eliza climbed to the second floor, her heart beating faster with each step. The Greek antiquities section was quieter, populated mostly by serious-looking academics sketching sculptures. She walked past marble gods frozen in eternal perfection, past amphorae decorated with scenes of battles and feasts, until she found him. Adrian stood before a statue of Athena, hands clasped behind his back, studying the goddess with the intensity he brought to everything. He wore a simple dark suit, no ornamentation, but something about him commanded the space anyway. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "You came." He sounded almost surprised. "You said it was important." Adrian glanced around, then gestured toward a quieter alcove where a bench sat beneath a frieze of the Parthenon. They sat, maintaining the careful distance propriety demanded, but Eliza felt hyper-aware of every inch between them. "What I'm about to tell you," Adrian said quietly, "will be difficult to hear, but you need to know before you commit your life to Richard Hastings." "Then tell me." He drew a breath, and for the first time since she'd known him, Adrian looked uncertain, reluctant. "Richard has debts, serious ones, gambling mostly, but also investments in ventures that—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "Let's say they wouldn't survive daylight examination. He owes money to people who don't politely ask for repayment." Eliza's stomach clenched. "How much?" "Enough that your dowry won't cover it. That's why he needs the marriage. Not just your money, but your family's connections, your father's political influence. He's using you as collateral for his own survival." You could be lying, but even as she said it, she knew he wasn't. Adrian Blackwood didn't waste time on lies. "I could be. You should verify it yourself, but Eliza—" He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his dark eyes stole her breath. "There's worse. The company he keeps. The places he goes when he thinks no one's watching. He has habits. Vices that won't disappear when he marries. They'll just become your problem to hide." The marble beneath her hands was cool and solid, grounding her while her world tilted. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve better. I'm no one to you." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the famous Blackwood control. That's not true. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Eliza forced herself to think through the roaring in her ears. Even if everything you say is true, she said slowly, what am I supposed to do? My family needs this match. My father's debts are real too. If I break the engagement, I know, Adrian's voice was rough. I know the impossible position you're in. That's why I struggled with whether to tell you at all. But I couldn't watch you walk into that blindly. Eliza stood abruptly, needing distance, needing to move. She walked to the alcove entrance, staring unseen at Greek warriors frozen in bronze. You should investigate, Adrian said behind her, quietly, before the wedding, before it's too late to extricate yourself. And how exactly does one investigate one's own fiancé? Carefully, intelligently. You're not some sheltered fool, Eliza. I've watched you navigate that social swamp for years. You see everything, remember? You just need to look at Richard the same way you look at everyone else, without the blinders your family put on you. She turned back to him. He'd stood too, and now they faced each other across a space that felt both vast and insufficient. Why do you care? The question came out raw, unguarded. We barely know each other. Adrian's jaw tightened. For a long moment he didn't answer, then, I remember things. Details that shouldn't matter, but do. I remember that you take your tea with cream, but no sugar. That you hate pearls, but wear them because your mother insists. That when you're uncomfortable, you touch your left earring. I remember finding you in my library 5 years ago and thinking, he stopped, something like frustration crossing his face. I should have said something then. I should have, but I didn't. And now you're engaged to a man who will waste you, and I can't just watch that happen. Eliza's breath caught. Adrian, investigate, he said firmly, rebuilding his walls with visible effort. Start with his finances, his associates, where he goes on Thursday nights. And if you find I'm wrong, I'll apologize for wasting your time. But if you're right, I'll still be trapped, just better informed. Maybe. Or maybe you're more resourceful than you give yourself credit for. They stood there, two people balanced on the edge of something that could ruin them both if anyone knew they'd met like this. The scandal of an engaged woman meeting secretly with another man, especially one like Adrian Blackwood, would destroy her reputation faster than any broken engagement. I should go, Eliza said finally. I told my mother I'd be back by 5. Adrian nodded. Then, in a move that shocked them both, he reached out and caught her hand briefly. His fingers were warm, calloused from riding rather than soft from idleness. Be careful, he said. Men like Richard are most dangerous when they feel cornered. Then he released her and walked away, disappearing into the museum's shadows without looking back. Eliza stood alone among the marble gods, her hand still warm where he'd touched it, her mind racing with impossible choices and dangerous truths. She thought about Richard's smile, the way he'd looked at her earlier, promising security and comfort and everything except honesty. And she thought about Adrian's words. You're more resourceful than you give yourself credit for. Maybe she was. Maybe she'd spent so long playing the role of the obedient daughter, the perfect fiancée, that she'd forgotten she could choose to be something else. Or maybe she was just a fool about to throw away her only chance at survival for the sake of pride and some half-formed feelings for a man who probably just felt sorry for her. Either way, Eliza realized as she left the museum and stepped back into London's gray afternoon, she couldn't unknow what Adrian had told her. She couldn't unsee the cracks in the perfect picture her family had painted. So she would do what he suggested. She would investigate. Carefully. Quietly. And then she would decide whether truth was worth the price of everything else. The carriage ride home felt longer than the ride there, every turn bringing her closer to a dinner with the Hastings family where she'd have to smile and perform and pretend nothing had changed. But something had changed. A small, quiet rebellion had begun in Eliza's chest, a refusal to be passive in her own destruction. Whatever came next, whatever she found, she would face it with her eyes open. That was something, at least. That was a start. Dinner at the Hastings residence was exactly what Eliza expected. Ostentatious wealth displayed with all the subtlety of a carnival barker. The dining room could have seated 30 but held only 8. Richard's parents, his younger brother Thomas, Eliza's parents, Margaret, and the engaged couple themselves. Crystal and silver caught candlelight, throwing dancing shadows across walls papered in burgundy silk that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. Richard's father, Lord Edmund Hastings, held court from the head of the table, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. The wedding will be the event of the season, naturally. We're thinking St. George's, Hanover Square. Nothing but the best for our Richard's bride. How lovely, Lady Thornfield purred, already calculating the social capital such a venue would generate. Eliza moved food around her plate and tried to focus on the conversation, but Adrian's words kept intruding. She found herself watching Richard differently now, cataloging details she'd previously dismissed as irrelevant. The way his hand shook slightly when he reached for his wine glass. Third refill, and they hadn't finished the second course. The flash of irritation that crossed his face when his father mentioned the wedding expenses quickly smoothed into that practiced smile. The way Thomas, who was barely 18, flinched when Richard leaned close to whisper something that made him go pale. "Miss Thornfield?" Eliza jerked her attention back. Richard's mother, Lady Constance, was watching her with cool appraisal. "I asked if you'd given thought to your wedding gown." "Some thought, yes," Eliza manufactured enthusiasm. "Though I confess I'm still undecided." "You'll want something that photographs well," Lady Constance said. It wasn't a suggestion. "The illustrated papers will want images, naturally. We must present the right impression." Everything was about impression. Presentation. The performance of perfection while rot spread beneath the surface. "Darling, you look tired," Richard said, his hand finding hers under the table. To anyone watching, it was tender concern, but his grip was just slightly too tight. "Perhaps we should conclude early tonight." "I'm fine," Eliza said, reclaiming her hand to reach for her water glass. "Simply trying to absorb all the wonderful plans." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. The dinner dragged on for another hour. By the time their carriage finally departed, Eliza's face ached from performing contentment. "The Hastings are so generous," her mother said, settling into the seat with satisfied smugness. "Did you see the bracelet Constance wore? Emeralds. Colombian, if I'm not mistaken." "Probably purchased with someone else's money," Margaret muttered. "Margaret!" Lady Thornfield's voice could have cut glass. "Such unkind speculation is beneath you." But Eliza caught Margaret's eye in the dimness, and something passed between them. A shared suspicion. A crack in the perfect facade their mother demanded they maintain. Their father had stayed behind with Lord Edmund for brandy and cigars. Business, they'd called it. Eliza wondered what business exactly, and whether it involved the kind of ventures Adrian had mentioned. Back home, she pleaded exhaustion and retreated to her room. Marie helped her undress, unlacing the corset that had felt like armor all evening. "Will that be all, miss?" "Yes, thank you, Marie. You can retire." Alone finally, Eliza sat at her writing desk and pulled out a piece of paper. She'd never been one for diaries, too dangerous, too easy for prying eyes to discover secrets. But tonight she needed to organize her thoughts. She wrote Richard's name at the top, then began listing everything she actually knew about him versus what she'd assumed. Facts. Wealthy family, recently returned from 2 years in Europe, gambles at gentlemen's clubs, keeps a residence in Mayfair separate from his family home. Assumptions. Respectable, financially stable, interested in her for herself rather than just her connections. The second list suddenly seemed painfully naive. She added a new column. Questions to investigate. Where does he go on Thursday nights? Who are his close associates? What are these investments Adrian mentioned? Why does Thomas seem afraid of him? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Margaret slipped in without waiting for permission, already in her nightgown, dark hair loose around her shoulders. "I saw your light," she said, closing the door behind her. "Couldn't sleep either. Too much rich food." Eliza quickly covered her notes with a book. Margaret wasn't fooled. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, studying her sister with uncommon intensity. "Something's wrong. You've been different since last night, distant. I'm tired, Maggie. The engagement, the planning, Mother's constant—" "Don't." Margaret's voice was firm. "Don't do that thing where you pretend everything's fine when it clearly isn't. I'm not Mother, I'm not stupid, and I'm not blind. Eliza met her sister's gaze and saw the same sharp intelligence that people overlooked because Margaret was young and pretty and supposedly frivolous. It was an act, Eliza realized, just like her own. "If I tell you something," Eliza said slowly, "can you keep it absolutely secret, even from mother and father?" "Always." So Eliza told her. About Adrian's warning at the museum, about the debts and vices and dangerous associates. She didn't mention her feelings for Adrian. Some truths were still too raw to speak aloud. But she told her sister enough. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "I knew it," she said when Eliza finished. "I knew something was rotten about him. The way he looks at you sometimes, like you're a horse he's bought, and now he's checking for defects." "That's not—" "It is, Liza, and you know it. You're just trying to be practical." Margaret grabbed her hand. "But what if practical gets you killed? Or worse, trapped in a marriage with a man who'll destroy you slowly, piece by piece? What choice do I have? Father's debts are his problem, not yours. You're not livestock to be sold to settle his gambling losses." Eliza pulled her hand away, standing to pace the room. "That's easy to say when you're not the one responsible for saving this family. You're not responsible for saving anyone. That's what they've made you believe, but it's not true. Father made his choices. Richard made his. You're allowed to make yours." "And what choice is that exactly? Refuse the marriage and watch our family lose everything? Watch you have no prospects because our name is ruined? Watch Mother is part of the problem." Margaret's voice rose, then dropped to a harsh whisper. "She cares more about appearances than she does about your happiness, about your safety." They stared at each other across the room, years of unspoken resentments suddenly visible between them. "I'm going to investigate," Eliza said finally. "Adrian was right. I need to know what I'm walking into. But I can't break the engagement based on suspicions. I need proof." "Then I'll help you." "Absolutely not. If this goes wrong, we go down together." Margaret's chin lifted with stubborn determination. "I'm not letting you do this alone." Eliza wanted to argue to protect her younger sister from the consequences of rebellion, but the truth was she needed an ally, someone she could trust in a world built on deception. "Fine," she said, "but you follow my lead. No risks without my approval. Agreed?" "Agreed." They sealed it with a handshake that felt more binding than any legal contract. The next morning, Eliza began her investigation in earnest. She started with the obvious: Richard's social calendar. She'd noticed he mentioned Thursday evening commitments frequently, always vague about the details. Business dinners or club meetings that ran late. "I'm organizing a small gathering next Thursday," she told him when he called that afternoon, testing the waters. "Just a few friends for cards and music. Say you'll come?" There was the briefest hesitation on the other end of the line. "I'm afraid Thursday won't work, darling. Prior commitment. But Friday? Of course, Friday then." She kept her voice light, unbothered, but she'd gotten her confirmation. Thursday was significant. Whatever he was hiding, it happened on Thursdays. Margaret proved surprisingly adept at information gathering. She cultivated friendships with the younger sisters and cousins of Richard's associates, the overlooked girls who saw everything and were assumed to understand nothing. Within 3 days, she'd learned that Richard frequented a private club in a less respectable part of town, the kind of place that didn't appear in social registers. "The Golden Rose," Margaret reported during a stolen conversation in Eliza's room. Gambling, but also other things. One of the girls said her brother saw Richard there losing spectacular sums at cards, and there's a back room where, she hesitated, where men go with women who aren't their wives. Eliza's stomach turned, but she kept her expression neutral. "That's not proof. Lots of men visit such places. But not while engaged to women they supposedly respect." Fair point. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Thomas Hastings appeared at their door 3 days later, ostensibly to deliver a dinner invitation from his mother. But when Marie showed him to the drawing room where Eliza was reading, his nervousness was palpable. "Miss Thornfield, may I speak with you privately?" Eliza glanced at Marie, who took the hint and retreated, closing the doors behind her. "Thomas, if this is about the wedding plans—" "It's not." He twisted his hat in his hands, barely 18 and already looking hunted. "I shouldn't be here. Richard would be furious if he knew, but I can't. I can't let you marry him without knowing. Eliza set down her book slowly. Knowing what? He's in debt. Serious debt. To people who don't just send polite reminders. Thomas's words came in a rush, like he'd been holding them back too long. He told me it would all be fine once the marriage was finalized, that your father's connections would help him make certain investments that would pay everything back. But I've seen the ledgers, Miss Thornfield. The numbers don't work. Even with your dowry, even with the connections, he's drowning. Why are you telling me this? Thomas met her eyes, and she saw genuine distress there. Because you seem kind, and Richard isn't. He's my brother, and I wish I could say otherwise. But he's not kind, and he's desperate, and desperate men do terrible things. What kind of terrible things? He looked away. Just be careful. Please. That's all I can say. He left before she could press for details, practically fleeing the house. Eliza stood in the drawing room, her heart pounding. She had confirmation now from Richard's own brother. The debts were real. The desperation was real. But she still needed more. Hard evidence. Something her father couldn't dismiss as gossip or jealousy. That evening, she did something reckless. She told her mother she was having tea with Catherine again. Instead, she took a cab to the offices of her father's solicitor, Mr. Pembroke. She'd met him numerous times over the years, a dry, methodical man who'd handled the Thornfield family business for decades. Miss Thornfield. He looked surprised when his clerk showed her in. I wasn't aware we had an appointment. We don't? I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Pembroke, but I need to ask you something in confidence. His expression grew cautious. If this is about your father's affairs, it's about my fiancée's. She sat without being invited, channeling every ounce of Lady Thornfield's imperious confidence. I need to know the truth about Richard Hastings' financial situation before I legally bind myself to his debts. Pembroke's face went carefully blank. Miss Thornfield, I'm not at liberty to discuss another man's private business. But you know something. I can see it. She leaned forward. Mr. Pembroke, you've known me since I was a child. My father trusts you. I'm asking you to extend that same consideration to me. If I'm walking into a disaster, don't I have the right to know? He was silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with professional ethics and personal concern. Finally, I cannot give you specifics, but I can tell you this. If I had a daughter, I would not want her marrying into the Hastings family right now. Their situation is precarious. How precarious? The kind where one scandal, one bad investment, one creditor losing patience could bring the entire structure crashing down. He met her eyes. And wives are not protected from their husbands' debts, Miss Thornfield. Once you marry him, his problems become legally yours. Eliza felt cold despite the office's warmth. And my father knows this? Pembroke's silence was answer enough. He's willing to sacrifice me anyway, she said quietly, because Richard's family's money will keep us afloat long enough for him to fix his own mess. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Thank you, Mr. Pembroke, for your honesty. Miss Thornfield? She turned back. Be very careful. Men in desperate financial straits are dangerous, especially to the people they need most. The cab ride home blurred past. Eliza sat in the darkness, letting pieces fall into place with sickening clarity. Her father knew. He knew Richard was drowning in debt, knew the marriage was a financial gamble rather than a secure alliance. But he was gambling anyway, using her as the stake. And her mother either knew and didn't care, or had deliberately closed her eyes to anything that disrupted her perfect social narrative. They'd sold her, not to save the family, to save themselves. When she arrived home, she found Margaret waiting in her room, practically vibrating with suppressed energy. I found something, her sister said the moment the door closed. She pulled a folded newspaper from beneath her pillow. Look at this. It was a week-old edition of a scandal sheet, the kind respectable people claim not to read but always somehow knew the contents of. Margaret had circled a small item in the social notes section. A certain newly engaged gentleman with initials R.H. was seen at the Golden Rose establishment until the early hours, reportedly losing heavily at cards and creating quite a scene when asked to settle his accounts. One wonders if his forthcoming nuptials are motivated by affection or arithmetic. It's not proof in a legal sense, Margaret said, but but combined with everything else, it's a pattern. Liza stared at the newsprint, something hardening in her chest. A pattern of recklessness and debt and deception. So what do we do? That was the question. Eliza had evidence now, not enough to take to court, but enough to know Adrian had been telling the truth. Richard was everything she'd feared and worse. Marrying him meant inheriting his disasters, becoming responsible for debts she didn't make, and vices she couldn't control. But breaking the engagement meant scandal, social ruin, her family's fury. "I need to think," she said finally, "and I need more. One more piece of evidence so damning that even father can't ignore it." "Where are we going to find that?" Eliza looked at her sister, then at the newspaper article mentioning the golden rose. An idea formed. Reckless, dangerous, exactly the kind of thing a sensible woman would never attempt. "Thursday night," she said slowly. "You said Richard goes to the Golden Rose on Thursday nights?" Margaret's eyes widened. "Liza, no, you can't possibly. I need to see it myself. Witness it firsthand, otherwise it's all just hearsay and rumor." "It's a gambling den. Probably worse. Women don't. Respectable women don't." "Exactly. Which is why no one will expect it." Eliza's mind was racing now, turning over possibilities. "I'll need a disguise, something simple, lower class. A widow's veil would hide my face, and you'll need to cover for me with mother. This is insane. This is necessary." They stared at each other, and Eliza saw the moment Margaret accepted the inevitable. "Fine," her sister said, "but I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not. You said no risks without your approval." "Well, I don't approve of you going alone. Either we both go, or I tell Mother everything right now." It was blackmail, pure and simple. Eliza would have been proud if she weren't so terrified. "Fine, but we do this my way, carefully, with an exit plan if anything goes wrong." Margaret nodded. "When?" "This Thursday. We tell Mother we're attending a lecture at the Literary Society. It runs late, so she won't expect us back until 10 or 11. That gives us a window. And if we're caught, then we face the consequences together." It was a foolish plan, reckless, the kind of thing that could destroy them both if discovered, but Eliza was done being careful, done being obedient, done sacrificing herself on the altar of her family's comfort without even knowing what she was sacrificing for. Thursday came faster than she expected and slower than she wanted. Eliza spent the intervening days in a state of controlled anxiety, second-guessing every aspect of the plan while simultaneously moving forward with grim determination. She borrowed clothing from Marie, widow's weeds that the maid had kept from a previous position. The black dress was plain, slightly worn, perfect for blending into shadows. The veil was thick enough to obscure her face while still allowing her to see. Margaret proved surprisingly resourceful, somehow acquiring similar attire and a hired cab that would wait at a discreet distance. "How did you manage that?" Eliza asked when her sister revealed the arrangements. "Catherine's brother knows people. I may have implied we were conducting charitable work in unfortunate neighborhoods and needed discretion." Margaret shrugged. "He didn't ask questions." Thursday evening arrived wrapped in fog. Perfect cover, Eliza thought, as they prepared in her room. They dressed in their borrowed morning clothes, checking and rechecking their appearances in the mirror. "We look like proper tragic widows," Margaret said, attempting levity that didn't quite land. "Good. That's the idea." They slipped out through the servants' entrance while their parents were at dinner with friends. The cab waited 3 streets over, exactly as arranged. "The Golden Rose," Eliza told the driver, "on Chesterfield Lane." He gave them a long look but said nothing, probably assuming they were exactly what they appeared to be, poor women seeking work or charity in questionable neighborhoods. The drive took them from Belgravia's pristine facades into progressively grimier streets. The Golden Rose, when they arrived, looked almost respectable from the outside. A 3-story building with curtained windows and a discreet brass plaque. Nothing to suggest the vice supposedly flourishing inside. "Stay close," Eliza murmured to Margaret as they approached the entrance. A doorman blocked their path, large, scarred, the kind of man hired to handle trouble. "Members only," he said flatly. Eliza had anticipated this. She'd brought money, coins she'd been saving from her allowance for months. She pressed several into his palm, more than he probably made in a week. "We're looking for someone," she said, pitching her voice lower, rougher. "My sister's husband. He owes us money. We just need to confirm he's here." The doorman counted the coins, then stepped aside. "Gambling rooms are upstairs. Don't cause trouble." They entered into a dimly lit hallway that smelled of cigar smoke, perfume, and something sharper, desperation masked by expensive cologne. Music drifted from somewhere deeper in the building, along with laughter and the clink of glasses. Eliza's heart hammered as they climbed the stairs. At the top, they found themselves in a large room dominated by card tables. Men in evening dress clustered around them, drinks in hand, money changing hands with casual ease that belied the tension beneath. And there, at a table in the corner, sat Richard. He'd discarded his jacket, his shirt slightly disheveled, a glass of whiskey at his elbow. Cards were spread before him, and even from a distance Eliza could read his body language. The rigid shoulders, the too bright eyes, the barely controlled fury of a man losing badly. "Raise," he said, pushing chips forward with shaking hands. His opponent, a cold-eyed man with silver hair, studied him like a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. "That's more than you have, Hastings. I'm good for it. You know I'm good for it. I know you've been saying that for 3 months. Your credit's running thin." Richard's face flushed. "The wedding is in 6 weeks. Once it's done, you'll have new money to lose." The silver-haired man laid down his cards. Straight flush. "You're done for the night." "One more hand. You're done." It wasn't a suggestion. Richard stood so abruptly his chair fell backward. For a moment, Eliza thought he might actually strike the other man. Then he seemed to remember where he was, who was watching. He straightened his cuffs with jerky movements, grabbed his jacket, and stalked toward a door at the back of the room. Eliza and Margaret pressed against the wall as he passed, the veil hiding them in shadow. He was close enough that Eliza could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the sweat on his forehead despite the room's coolness. He disappeared through the door. "Should we follow?" Margaret whispered. Every instinct screamed no. They'd seen enough. They should leave now while they still could, before their luck ran out. But Eliza needed more, needed to understand just how deep the corruption went. "Stay here," she told Margaret. "If I'm not back in 5 minutes, leave without me." "Eliza!" But Eliza was already moving, slipping through the crowd toward that back door. No one paid her much attention. In her widow's weeds, she was invisible, just another sad story in a place full of them. The door led to a hallway lined with private rooms. Behind one door, she heard raised voices, Richard's among them. She pressed closer, heart in her throat. "Can't keep extending credit indefinitely," an unfamiliar voice was saying. "We're not a charity, Hastings. I told you, the marriage might fall through. Engagements break all the time. We need assurance now." "What kind of assurance?" "The kind written in ink and witnessed by lawyers. A promissory note against your father's assets if you can't make good." Silence. Then Richard's voice, tight with barely contained rage. "My father will never agree to that." "Then perhaps you should have thought of that before losing 40,000 pounds at our tables." Eliza's breath caught. 40,000 pounds. It was a staggering sum. More than most families saw in a lifetime. "I need more time. You need a miracle. Or a very wealthy, very foolish wife." Harsh laughter. "Good thing you've secured one of those, at least." Footsteps approached the door. Eliza fled back down the hallway, pulse racing, and found Margaret exactly where she'd left her. "We need to leave. Now." They made it to the stairs, down to the entrance, out into the foggy night. The cab was still waiting, and they threw themselves inside, gasping like runners who'd finished a desperate race. "Drive," Eliza managed. "Anywhere. Just drive." The cabbie didn't need to be told twice. It wasn't until they were several streets away that either of them spoke. 40,000 pounds, Margaret said in a stunned whisper. "He owes 40,000 pounds. And he planned to use my dowry, my father's assets, my entire future to pay for it." Eliza's hands were shaking, adrenaline and fury mixing into something dangerous. "They're talking about me like I'm livestock, a commodity to be traded. What are you going to do?" Eliza stared out at the London night, at the fog swallowing streets and buildings and the careful lies that held their world together. She thought about her father's knowing complicity, her mother's willful blindness, Richard's casual cruelty, the entire system built on using women as currency to settle men's debts. And she thought about Adrian's words at the museum. "You're more resourceful than you give yourself credit for." "I'm going to break the engagement," she said quietly, publicly, decisively, in a way that makes it impossible for father to force me back into it. That's social suicide. Maybe, or maybe it's survival. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached over and took Eliza's hand. "Whatever you do, I'm with you. Even if it destroys us? Especially then." The cab took them home through streets that looked the same as they had hours earlier but felt completely different. Eliza had crossed a line tonight. She'd stopped gathering information and started choosing action. There would be consequences. Terrible ones, probably. But for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt like herself again. Not the perfect daughter, not the obedient fiancée, but Eliza Thornfield, sharp-minded and clear-eyed and absolutely done being anyone's convenient solution. Tomorrow, she would begin planning her rebellion. Tonight, she would sleep knowing the decision was already made. The fog swallowed the cab as they rolled toward home, and Eliza felt something that might have been fear or might have been freedom. Probably both. Probably both. The realization settled into Eliza's bones during the sleepless hours that followed. She and Margaret had made it home undetected, slipping back through the servants' entrance and into their rooms like ghosts. But now, alone in the darkness, Eliza felt the full weight of what she'd witnessed crushing down on her chest. 40,000 pounds. Richard's casual cruelty. The way those men had discussed her like she was livestock being appraised at market. She sat at her writing desk as dawn crept through the curtains, composing a letter she knew would detonate her entire life. "Dear Father, I cannot marry Richard Hastings. I know about his debts, all of them. I know you were aware of his situation when you arranged this match. I know I am being sold to cover your mistakes and his. I will not do it. The engagement is over. Your daughter, Eliza Short, direct. Impossible to misinterpret." She sealed it before she could second-guess herself, then waited until she heard her father's study door open downstairs. He always took breakfast there on Fridays, reviewing correspondence before the day's obligations. Eliza dressed quickly, her hands steadier than she'd expected. The woman in the mirror looked different somehow, harder around the edges, determined in a way that felt both foreign and right. She found her father exactly where she knew he'd be, surrounded by newspapers and letters, a cup of tea cooling at his elbow. Lord William Thornfield looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his distinguished features. "Eliza, you're up early." "I need to speak with you, privately." Something in her tone made him set down his paper. "What's this about?" She handed him the letter. He read it once, quickly, then again, slower. The color drained from his face, replaced by a mottled fury that made his hands shake. "What exactly do you think you know?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "Everything. His gambling debts, the 40,000 pounds he owes to people who don't take kindly to late payments, the fact that you knew about all of it and arranged the marriage anyway because you needed his family's money to cover your own losses." "You ungrateful—" He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against hardwood. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? What you're doing to this family?" "I'm saving myself from being destroyed by a man you knew was dangerous." "He's our only option." Her father's composure cracked completely. "Without this marriage, without the Hastings alliance, we lose everything. The house, the estates, our position in society, everything your mother and I have built. Everything you gambled away, you mean?" He struck the desk with his palm, making the teacup rattle. "You will marry Richard Hastings. You will smile and play your part and be grateful that any respectable man wants you at all." "No." The word hung in the air between them, simple and absolute. Lord Thornfield stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "This is not a negotiation, Eliza. I am your father. You will obey me in this." "I'm 22 years old. You can't force me to the altar." "Can't I?" His smile was ugly. "You think you have choices? Without my consent, you have no money, no prospects, no future. You'll be ruined, unmarriageable, you and your sister both once the scandal spreads. Then we'll be ruined together. But I won't be Mrs. Richard Hastings. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. If you do this, you're no daughter of mine. I'll cut you off completely. No inheritance, no support, nothing. You'll be alone. Eliza looked back at him. This man who'd taught her to ride, who'd once read her bedtime stories, who'd become a stranger consumed by pride and debt and the desperate need to maintain appearances. I've been alone for a long time, Father. I just didn't realize it until now. She left him sitting in his study, surrounded by the wreckage of his carefully constructed lies. The house erupted within the hour. Lady Thornfield's shriek could probably be heard in the next county when Lord Thornfield informed her of Eliza's decision. She descended on Eliza's room like an avenging fury, Margaret trailing behind with wide, frightened eyes. "Have you lost your mind?" Her mother's face was white with rage. "Do you understand what you've done?" "I understand that I won't marry a man drowning in debt and vice." "Vice? Debt? Those are rumors, nothing more. Jealous gossip from—" "I have proof, Mother. I've seen his gambling debts myself. £40,000 to dangerous people who expect to be paid with my dowry and father's connections." Lady Thornfield's hand flew up, and for a moment Eliza thought she might actually be slapped. But her mother caught herself, trembling with barely controlled fury. "You sneaking, ungrateful wretch! After everything we've done for you, after the opportunities we've provided, you didn't do anything for me. You did it for yourselves, to maintain your position, your comfort, your precious social standing. And what do you think happens to you without that standing?" Her mother's voice turned cold, calculated. "You think you'll find another match? You think any respectable family will touch you after you've broken an engagement? You'll be ruined, Eliza, completely and utterly ruined." "Then I'll be ruined." The certainty in her own voice surprised even Eliza. She'd spent her whole life afraid of that word, ruined. It was the worst thing that could happen to a woman in their world, worse than poverty, worse than death. But standing here now, facing her mother's fury, she realized ruin might be survivable after all. "Get out!" Lady Thornfield's words were ice. "Get out of my sight, and don't expect any support from me when you're begging in the streets." Eliza left her mother's room and nearly collided with Margaret in the hallway. Her sister grabbed her arm, dragging her into the nearest empty room, a small sitting room no one used. "What happened? I heard Mother screaming." "I told Father I won't marry Richard. He told Mother. Now they're both furious and threatening to disown me." Eliza tried to keep her voice steady, but it shook at the edges. "I'm sorry, Maggie. This is going to affect you too." "I don't care about that." Margaret's grip tightened. "Are you sure? Once you do this publicly, there's no taking it back. I'm sure. Then we need a plan, because they're not going to let you just walk away quietly." Margaret was right. Within hours, the full machinery of social warfare mobilized against Eliza. Her father sent word to the Hastings family, claiming Eliza was having a nervous episode brought on by wedding stress. Lady Thornfield began spreading carefully crafted lies to their social circle. Poor Eliza was overwrought, suffering from feminine hysteria. Nothing serious but the wedding might need to be postponed until she recovered. The Hastings sent their physician. Dr. Carmichael arrived that afternoon, a stern man with cold hands and colder eyes. He examined Eliza in her room while her mother hovered like a jailer. "She seems perfectly healthy to me," he said after a cursory inspection. "Physically, at least." "It's her mind we're concerned about," Lady Thornfield said smoothly. "She's been saying such strange things, imagining scenarios, making accusations. We're worried the stress has affected her reason." Eliza's blood ran cold. She understood the play now. They were going to declare her mentally unfit, claim she couldn't make rational decisions. It was a classic strategy. When a woman became inconvenient, question her sanity. "I'm perfectly rational," Eliza said clearly. "I simply refuse to marry a man I know to be financially and morally bankrupt." Dr. Carmichael and Lady Thornfield exchanged glances. "Delusions," her mother murmured. "Paranoid fantasies about her fiancé. It's heartbreaking." "I have evidence. Witnesses. I can prove everything I've said." "Of course you can, dear." Her mother's voice dripped with false sympathy. "Dr. Carmichael, what do you recommend?" "Rest. Isolation from agitating influences. Perhaps a mild sedative to calm her nerves." "No." Eliza stood, backing toward the door. "You're not drugging me into compliance." "Eliza, this is for your own good." But Eliza was already moving, yanking open the door and nearly running into Margaret, who'd been listening at the keyhole. "They're trying to call me insane," Eliza hissed. "We need to leave. Now." Margaret's eyes widened, but she nodded. "I'll get our coats. Meet me at the servants' entrance in 5 minutes." Eliza grabbed what she could: money from the small stash in her drawer, a few pieces of jewelry that could be sold, a change of clothes. She could hear her mother's voice in the hallway, calling for the footman. They were going to lock her in her room, drug her, keep her prisoner until the wedding. She made it to the servants' entrance just as Margaret appeared, coats in hand, breathing hard. "Where are we going?" Margaret whispered as they slipped out into the gray afternoon. "Somewhere they won't think to look." Eliza hailed a cab and gave an address she'd memorized but never thought she'd actually use. Adrian had mentioned it once, years ago during that conversation in the library, his London townhouse on Grosvenor Square. He preferred his northern estates, he'd said, but kept the city residence for business. It was bold to the point of insanity. Showing up at an unmarried man's residence would complete her social ruin even if nothing improper happened. But Eliza was out of options and out of allies. The house was exactly as imposing as she'd expected. 4 stories of gray stone, windows that reflected the cloudy sky like blank eyes. She paid the cabbie and stood on the pavement, Margaret beside her, both of them trembling with cold and adrenaline. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Margaret asked. Eliza wasn't certain about anything anymore, but she climbed the steps and used the brass knocker anyway. A butler answered, elderly, dignified, radiating the kind of discretion that came with decades of service to the wealthy. "Miss Eliza Thornfield to see the Duke of Thornhaven," Eliza said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "It's urgent." The butler's expression didn't change. "His Grace is not receiving visitors today." "Please, tell him it's about the matter we discussed at the museum. He'll understand." Something flickered in the butler's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or pity. He stepped aside. "Wait in the drawing room. I'll see if His Grace is available." The drawing room was all dark wood and leather, books lining every wall, a fire crackling in the grate. It smelled like Adrian, cedar and smoke and something sharper, like snow. Margaret sank into a chair, suddenly looking very young. "What if he won't help us?" "Then we figure something else out." But Eliza didn't have a backup plan. This was it, her last gamble, her final card to play. Footsteps in the hallway. The door opened. Adrian stood there in shirt sleeves, waistcoat unbuttoned, looking like he'd been interrupted in the middle of work. His dark eyes went from Eliza to Margaret and back, taking in their disheveled state, the coats hastily thrown on, the obvious fear. What happened? No preamble, no social niceties, just immediate focused concern. "I need your help," Eliza said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "I broke the engagement. My parents are trying to declare me insane to force the marriage through. I didn't know where else to go." Adrian's expression went absolutely cold, the kind of cold that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Tell me everything." So she did. The investigation, the Thursday night expedition to the Golden Rose, the 40,000 pounds, the confrontation with her father, her mother's attempt to have her medicated and controlled. Margaret added details Eliza missed. The 2 sisters tag-teaming the story while Adrian listened with increasing fury. When they finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to his butler, who'd been hovering discreetly in the doorway. "Henshaw, prepare 2 guest rooms, and send word to my solicitor. I need him here within the hour." "Your Grace," Eliza started. "You're staying here, both of you, under my protection until we sort this out." That will destroy my reputation completely." "Your reputation is already destroyed the moment you broke that engagement. At least this way you'll be safe while it happens." He was right, and Eliza knew it. She'd crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back to her old life, no undoing what she'd set in motion. "Thank you," she said quietly. Adrian's expression softened slightly. "You did the right thing, coming to me, I mean, and breaking free of that bastard before he could drag you down with him. My father says I'll lose everything. Then we'll make sure you gain something better." The solicitor arrived within the hour, a sharp-eyed man named Whitmore who listened to Eliza's story with the detached interest of someone who'd seen worse. "The insanity claim is concerning," he said when she finished. "If they can get a doctor to sign papers declaring you mentally unfit, your father could maintain control of your decisions until you're married or turn 25. "That's 3 years, Margaret said, horrified. "Indeed. However, Miss Thornfield's actions and testimony suggest a perfectly sound mind. The question is whether we can prove it before they move forward with their scheme." "What do we need?" Adrian asked. "Evidence? Documentation of Hastings' debts? Witnesses to his character? Anything that demonstrates Miss Thornfield's concerns were rational and justified rather than delusional." Eliza thought of Thomas Hastings, who'd warned her, of Mr. Pembroke, who'd confirmed the financial precarity, of the gambling den itself, the conversation she'd overheard. "I can get evidence, but I'll need time." "Time is precisely what we don't have," Whitmore said. "Once the Hastings and Thornfield families realize you've fled, they'll move quickly to contain the scandal, within days, possibly hours. Then we move faster." Adrian stood, all controlled energy and purpose. "Whitmore, draw up an affidavit documenting everything Eliza has told us. I'll have it notarized tonight. In the meantime, I'm calling in some favors." "What kind of favors?" Eliza asked. "The kind that come with being a duke and knowing where all the bodies are buried." His smile was sharp. "Richard Hastings isn't the only one with debts and secrets. His creditors will talk to me. And the owners of the Golden Rose owe me for certain past considerations." Eliza stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time the steel beneath Adrian's controlled exterior. He wasn't just wealthy and titled, he was powerful in the way that came from understanding exactly how the world's machinery worked and knowing which gears to turn. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Helping me like this? Risking your own reputation?" Adrian met her eyes, and something passed between them, acknowledgement of what neither had said aloud. "Because you deserve better than what they were offering you. And because—" He hesitated, then seemed to decide something. "Because I should have said something 5 years ago when I found you crying in my library. I should have told you then that you were worth more than whatever had made you cry. I didn't. I let the moment pass. I'm not making that mistake again." The room fell silent except for the crackling fire. Margaret cleared her throat delicately. "I'll just go see about those guest rooms." She fled, leaving Eliza and Adrian alone. 5 years, Eliza said softly. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about you." Adrian's voice was rough. "The way you take your tea. The way you touch your left earring when you're nervous. You're doing it right now. I remember that you cried silently that day, like you were afraid someone would hear and punish you for having feelings. I remember wanting to ask who'd taught you that fear and wanting to destroy them for it." "Adrian, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know the timing is impossible. I know you've just escaped one engagement and the last thing you need is another man making demands. But I need you to know that you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, however this ends, you have an ally." Eliza felt something crack open in her chest, something she'd kept carefully locked away for years. "It's always been you," she heard herself say. "Even when I was promised to Richard, even when I tried to be practical and sensible and do what was expected, it was always you." The distance between them disappeared. She wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly Adrian's hands were cupping her face, and she was rising on her toes, and their lips met with the desperate intensity of something too long denied. He kissed like he did everything else, completely, intensely, holding nothing back. Eliza's hands found his shirt front, gripping the fabric like an anchor while the world spun around them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "We're doing this backwards," he murmured. "Scandal first, courtship later. I've never been good at following proper order. Thank God for that." The moment shattered when Henshaw knocked discreetly at the door. "Your Grace, Lord Thornfield is here. He's demanding to see his daughter." Eliza's blood turned to ice. "He found us. How—" "It doesn't matter." Adrian's expression hardened into something dangerous. "Henshaw, show him to the front parlor. Tell him I'll be with him momentarily." "Your Grace, perhaps it would be wiser to—" "I said I'd be there momentarily." The butler retreated. Adrian turned back to Eliza, taking her shoulders gently but firmly. Stay here. Let me handle this. He's my father. He's a man who tried to sell you to cover his debts and then attempted to have you declared insane when you objected. Let me handle this. There was no room for argument in his tone. Eliza nodded reluctantly. Adrian left, and she stood alone in the drawing room, listening to the sound of his footsteps descending the stairs. Then Margaret slipped in from wherever she'd been hiding. Is father really here? Yes. Adrian's dealing with him. We should listen. Margaret's eyes gleamed with uncharacteristic mischief. There's a servant's passage that connects to the parlor. We can hear everything. Maggie? But her sister was already moving, pulling Eliza toward a hidden door in the paneling. They slipped into the narrow passage, finding the listening spot Margaret had apparently discovered during her brief exploration. Adrian's voice came through clearly, cold and aristocratic. Lord Thornfield, to what do I owe the intrusion? You know damn well what this is about. Her father's voice shook with fury. You have my daughter, both of them. I want them returned immediately. Your daughters came to me seeking protection from your abuse. Abuse? I'm their father. I have every right. You have no rights that supersede their safety. Adrian's voice could have frozen flame. You attempted to force Eliza into a marriage with a man you knew to be dangerous and financially ruined. When she objected, you tried to have her declared mentally incompetent. That's not fatherhood. That's imprisonment. This is none of your business, Blackwood. Return my daughters now or I'll have the authorities involved. Excellent idea. Let's involve the authorities. I'm sure they'll be fascinated to hear about Richard Hastings' £40,000 in gambling debts, and the gentleman's club where he lost most of it, and the creditors who were promised payment via his marriage to your daughter. Silence. Then Lord Thornfield's voice, lower but more venomous. You arrogant pup. You think your title protects you from everything? You've ruined my daughter by harboring her here. She'll never recover from this scandal. She was already ruined the moment you sold her. I'm just offering her a different future. What future? Disgraced, unmarriageable, cut off from her family? She could marry me. The words fell into the conversation like stones into still water. Eliza's breath stopped. What? Lord Thornfield sounded as shocked as she felt. You heard me. If Eliza's reputation is destroyed by staying under my roof, then I'll marry her, properly, with full settlements and protections. She'll be a duchess. That's a considerably better outcome than Mrs. Richard Hastings would have been. You planned this. This whole thing was a scheme to steal. I planned nothing. Your daughter came to me because she had nowhere else to turn, but I'm willing to offer her the protection of my name and position if she'll have it. Through the gap in the paneling, Eliza could see her father's face turning purple with rage. I'll contest it. I'll tell everyone you compromised her, forced her, and I'll tell everyone the truth about Richard's debts, your gambling losses, the attempted medicalization of a sane woman to force a profitable marriage. Who do you think society will believe? A duke with an unblemished reputation, or a nobleman drowning in debt and desperate enough to sell his daughter? The threat hung in the air, sharp and clear. Lord Thornfield seemed to deflate, the fight draining out of him as he calculated the odds and found them impossible. The Hastings will sue for breach of contract. Let them. I have lawyers who eat breach of contract cases for breakfast, and if they're foolish enough to pursue it publicly, I'll ensure every detail of Richard's vice and financial ruin becomes public record. They'll withdraw rather than face that exposure. You've thought of everything. I've thought of protecting someone who deserves better than what you were offering her. Her father stood there, trapped in a corner of his own making, watching his carefully constructed plans crumble to dust. Fine, he said finally, his voice hollow. Keep them. But don't expect any support from me. They're no longer my daughters. I expect nothing from you except to stay away from them, permanently. Lord Thornfield left without another word. Eliza heard the front door slam, then silence. She and Margaret emerged from the passage to find Adrian standing in the drawing room doorway, watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. You heard, he said. It wasn't a question. You asked me to marry you. Eliza's voice came out steadier than she expected. Without actually asking me. I made an offer to your father to protect you from scandal. Whether you accept it is entirely your choice. Adrian's jaw was tight. I meant what I said earlier. I'm not making demands. But the offer stands. Marriage with full legal protections, separate residences if you prefer, an alliance of equals rather than a traditional arrangement. Or I can help you establish an independent life, set you up with funds and protection without the marriage. Whatever you choose. Margaret was looking between them like she was watching a play, eyes wide. Eliza stepped closer to Adrian, her heart hammering. And if I want a real marriage, not just an arrangement for protection? Something blazed in Adrian's dark eyes. Then I'd give you everything I have. Not because you need saving, but because I've been half in love with you for 5 years and fully in love with you since you walked into the museum, ready to investigate your own fiancé, rather than blindly trust either of us. That's not very romantic. I'm not a romantic man, but I'm an honest one. He reached for her hands, holding them gently. Marry me because you want to, Eliza. Not because you're trapped or scared or out of options. Marry me because you choose this, choose us. Choose a future where you're valued as an equal rather than used as currency. Eliza looked at this man who'd watched her for years without saying anything, who'd finally broken his own rules to warn her about danger, who'd just faced down her father with the cold precision of someone who knew exactly how to wield power. She thought about the life she'd almost had, Mrs. Richard Hastings, slowly drowning in someone else's debts and vices, while maintaining a perfect smile. And she thought about the life she could have instead, messy and scandalous and real, with someone who saw all of her and wanted her anyway. Yes, she said. Not because I need protection, not because I'm out of options, but because I choose you. I choose this. I choose us. Adrian kissed her then, fierce and claiming and full of promise, while Margaret politely turned away and pretended to be fascinated by the books lining the walls. When they finally broke apart, Eliza rested her head against his chest and felt his heart hammering as hard as her own. This is going to be the scandal of the season, she murmured. Let them talk. Adrian's arms tightened around her. We'll be too busy building something real to care. Outside, London continued its eternal performance, carriages rattling past, society maintaining its careful lies, the machinery of reputation and appearance grinding on. But inside Adrian's drawing room, Eliza Thornfield stood in the arms of the man she'd loved for years and felt for the first time in her life absolutely free. The cost had been everything she'd known, her family, her position, the comfortable certainty of the life she'd been promised. But what she'd gained was herself, her choice, her future, and that she was beginning to realize was worth any price. The words had barely settled into certainty when reality came crashing back. Whitmore cleared his throat from the doorway, his expression diplomatically neutral, despite having probably witnessed at least part of the scene. Your Grace, Miss Thornfield, we should discuss the practicalities. The engagement announcement will need to be immediate to prevent the worst of the scandal. And we'll need to move quickly on the Hastings matter before they regroup. Adrian's arms loosened around Eliza, though he kept one hand at the small of her back, a claiming gesture that sent warmth through her despite everything. How quickly? Tomorrow morning's papers, if possible. I can have the announcement written within the hour and delivered to the Times, the Chronicle, and the Morning Post. The society pages will run it by dawn. Do it. Adrian's voice carried absolute authority. And Whitmore? Make it clear this isn't a hasty arrangement. I've been courting Miss Thornfield for months, with her parents' full knowledge. The Hastings engagement was a mistake, now corrected. Eliza blinked. But that's not... It's the story that protects you, Adrian said quietly, turning to face her. The truth? That you investigated your fiancé, discovered his corruption, and fled to me for protection. Makes you look reckless at best, calculating at worst. But a prior courtship that was interrupted by family pressure? That's romantic, sympathetic. It positions the Hastings engagement as the aberration rather than ours. It's also a complete lie. It's strategy. His dark eyes held hers. I know you value truth, but sometimes survival requires choosing which truths to share and which to protect. This protects you, Margaret, and destroys the Hastings' ability to frame you as mentally unstable. Eliza wanted to argue, but she understood the brutal logic. In their world, narrative was everything. Control the story, and you controlled the damage. Fine, she said. We've been secretly courting. My parents knew. They pushed the Hastings match anyway for financial reasons. When I refused, I came to you. Exactly. Whitmore was already scribbling notes. I'll frame it as a love match that temporarily derailed but ultimately prevailed. The public adores that sort of thing, and it gives His Grace a motive for exposing Hastings' debts. Protective jealousy of a rival rather than calculated destruction. What about Richard? Margaret spoke up from her corner, where she'd been pretending not to listen. He's not going to just accept this quietly. Richard is going to have bigger problems than a broken engagement, Adrian said. I made some inquiries after our museum meeting. The people he owes money to are getting impatient. When word spreads that his wealthy marriage prospect has evaporated, they're going to demand immediate payment. Payment he doesn't have, Eliza said slowly, understanding dawning. Exactly. Within a week, maybe less, Richard Hastings will be drowning in calls for debt repayment he can't meet. His family will either cover his losses, unlikely, given the amount, or they'll let him face the consequences. Either way, he becomes everyone else's problem, not ours. It was ruthless, calculated. Everything Eliza had been raised to believe a gentleman shouldn't be. It was also brilliant. You've been planning this, she said. Not an accusation, just observation. Since the museum, you knew it would come to this. Adrian's expression didn't change. I planned for possibilities. Hoped I was wrong. But yes, I had Whitmore draw up contingencies the same day we spoke, because I know men like your father and Richard Hastings. I know how they operate, and I know they don't surrender power without being backed into a corner. You could have told me. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was trying to manipulate you into breaking the engagement for my own benefit? He had a point. A week ago, Eliza might have dismissed such scheming as paranoid or self-serving. So what happens now? She asked. Whitmore answered, still writing. The engagement announcement runs tomorrow. Simultaneously, I'll file paperwork with the courts documenting your concerns about the Hastings match and your father's attempted medical intervention. That creates a legal record that contradicts any insanity claims. Meanwhile, His Grace will make certain information available to Richard's creditors about the failed engagement. Let nature take its course from there. And my parents? My father said I'm cut off. He'll reverse that once he calculates the social cost of publicly disowning a daughter who's about to become a duchess. Adrian said, Your father's many things, but he's not stupid. Fighting this publicly hurts him more than accepting it. Margaret stood, smoothing her skirts with shaking hands. This all sounds very neat, but you're forgetting, we're in your house, unchaperoned. The scandal is already happening. By tomorrow morning, half of London will be talking about the Thornfield sisters spending the night with the Duke of Thornhaven. Which is why, Adrian said calmly, I'm sending a carriage for Lady Catherine Ashford within the hour. She's an old family friend, entirely respectable, and she'll serve as chaperone. Her presence retroactively legitimizes everything. You've really thought of everything, Eliza said. I've tried to. He caught her hand, thumb brushing over her knuckles. But understand, this is going to be difficult. The next few days, possibly weeks, will be brutal. The gossip, the whispers, people choosing sides. Your former friends may cut you. Society matrons will judge you. The Hastings will fight back however they can. I know. And at any point, if you want to back out, I don't. Eliza squeezed his hand. I chose this. I'm staying. Something like relief crossed Adrian's features before he masked it with his usual control. Lady Catherine arrived an hour later, a formidable woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She took in the situation with a single sweeping glance. Adrian, you've gotten yourself into a proper mess this time, she said, kissing his cheek without any apparent judgment. And you must be the infamous Eliza Thornfield. I've heard quite a bit about you. From Adrian? Eliza couldn't hide her surprise. Heavens, no! The boy never tells me anything useful, but I have excellent sources. Catherine's smile was knowing. I understand congratulations are in order? If you're willing to provide them, Lady Catherine. Oh, I'm willing. Always preferred you to that Hastings boy anyway. Dreadful family, new money pretending to be old, no sense of propriety. She settled into a chair like a general taking command. Now then, let's discuss how we're going to manage this circus. The next hours blurred into planning. Whitmore drafted announcements. Catherine mapped out social strategy, which events to attend, which to avoid, who could be counted as allies, and who would need careful management. Margaret proved surprisingly useful, her knowledge of London's social landscape more comprehensive than Eliza had realized. Through it all, Adrian remained a steady presence, offering input but mostly letting the others plan. Eliza caught him watching her several times, his expression unreadable. Around midnight, Catherine finally declared herself satisfied and shooed everyone to bed. "You'll need your rest. Tomorrow the wolves descend." Eliza's assigned room was beautiful, all soft blues and cream, a fire crackling in the grate, windows overlooking a small garden. Margaret had been given the connecting room, and their shared door stood open. "Can you believe this is happening?" Margaret whispered from her doorway once they were alone. "Yesterday morning, we were prisoners in our own house. Now you're engaged to a duke." Yesterday morning feels like a lifetime ago. "Are you happy, truly?" Eliza considered the question. Happy seemed too simple a word for the tangle of emotions churning in her chest. Relief, fear, anticipation, the lingering ache of losing her family, even if they'd stopped being family long before today. "I'm free," she said finally. "That's more than happiness. That's survival." Margaret crossed the space between them and hugged her fiercely. "I'm proud of you, for fighting back, for choosing yourself. We're not safe yet. The announcement hasn't run. Richard is about to face consequences for the first time in his privileged life. And we're under the protection of a man who clearly knows how to play this game better than Father ever did." Margaret pulled back, grinning. "Besides, Adrian looks at you like you're the only real thing in a world of ghosts. That's worth something." Sleep came fitfully. Eliza kept jolting awake, convinced she heard her father's voice or Richard's footsteps. But the house remained quiet except for the settling sounds of old wood and the distant clatter of London streets. Dawn came gray and cold. Eliza dressed carefully in borrowed clothes. Catherine had sent a trunk of garments that approximately fit, declaring that a future duchess couldn't be seen in yesterday's rumpled gown. The morning papers arrived at 7. Adrian brought them to the breakfast room himself, spreading them across the table where Eliza, Margaret, and Catherine were attempting to eat. There, on the front page of the society section in the Times, the Chronicle, and the Morning Post, the Duke of Thornhaven and Miss Eliza Thornfield to wed. Following the amicable dissolution of Miss Thornfield's previous engagement, the Duke of Thornhaven is pleased to announce his forthcoming marriage to Miss Eliza Thornfield, eldest daughter of Lord and Lady Thornfield. The couple has been privately courting for several months with family approval. The wedding will take place by special license within the fortnight at the Duke's private chapel in Thornhaven. Eliza read it 3 times, her coffee growing cold in her cup. The words made it real in a way nothing else had. This was happening. Her old life was over. The new one, uncertain, scandalous, terrifying, was beginning. "Fortnight seems fast," Margaret observed. "Speed prevents opposition from organizing," Catherine said practically. "Smart move." "I should have asked you first," Adrian said quietly to Eliza. "About the timeline. It's your wedding too." "No?" Eliza met his eyes across the table. "You were right about speed. Every day we delay is another day for enemies to maneuver. Besides, it's not like we need time to plan a grand society wedding. Those are performances for other people. This is just us." "Just us," Adrian repeated, and something like a smile ghosted across his features. The first callers arrived by 9 o'clock. Catherine handled most of them, well-wishers, curious gossips, social climbers wanting to align themselves with the Duke's favor. Through the drawing room windows, Eliza could see carriages lined up outside, society descending to assess the scandal and choose their positions. Some came with genuine good wishes, others with thinly veiled judgment. Lady Morrison arrived at 10, her disapproval radiating like cold fog. "Miss Thornfield, how sudden this all is." "Love often is, Lady Morrison," Catherine interjected smoothly, before Eliza could respond. "Though I'm told the Duke has admired Eliza for quite some time. Only family pressure delayed their union." "Family pressure? How convenient." Lady Morrison's smile was sharp as broken glass. "And the Hastings engagement? Also family pressure, I assume." "A mistake, now corrected," Eliza said, finding her voice. I'm grateful it ended before causing greater harm. Harm to whom, I wonder? Lady Morrison stood, her visit clearly concluded now that she'd delivered her judgment. I do hope you know what you're doing, dear. Broken engagements have a way of following a woman. People remember. Let them remember, Eliza replied. I'd rather be remembered for making a difficult choice than for quietly accepting a terrible one. Lady Morrison left in a rustle of expensive silk and older generation disapproval. That went well, Margaret said once the door closed. That was a warning shot, Catherine corrected. She'll spread the worst possible interpretation to everyone who'll listen. But she's old guard, limited influence among the younger set. The real test comes this evening. What's this evening? The Ashford Ball. Major event. Everyone who matters will attend. You need to be there, both of you, making a united front. Show society that you're confident, unbothered, exactly where you want to be. Eliza's stomach dropped. A ball? Tonight? That's essential, Adrian said. Catherine's right. Hide now and we look guilty, ashamed, appear together, happy, and we control the narrative. I don't have anything to wear to a ball. Catherine's smile was pure mischief. I took the liberty of having several gowns sent over this morning. We're similar size. And Margaret, I have something perfect for you as well. We'll make such an entrance that the gossips won't know whether to applaud or faint. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Catherine's modiste arrived with assistants, adjusting gowns and adding final touches. Margaret proved to have strong opinions about fashion, directing the process with surprising authority. Meanwhile, news from outside filtered in through Adrian's network of servants and associates. Richard had received word of the broken engagement and the new one. According to reports, he'd destroyed his study in a rage, throwing furniture and screaming threats. His father had locked him in his room until he calmed down. Lord Thornfield had sent a terse note accepting the inevitable and withdrawing his objection to the marriage. No apology, no acknowledgement of his attempted coercion, just cold capitulation. And Richard's creditors, hearing that his wealthy marriage prospect had evaporated, were indeed calling in debts with increasing urgency. It's working, Whitmore reported during an afternoon visit. Hastings is trapped. His family is trying to negotiate with creditors, but the amounts are staggering. Within days, possibly hours, some very unpleasant people are going to make very public demands for payment. Good, Eliza said, and meant it. She'd spent so long being taught to be kind, gentle, forgiving. But watching Richard face consequences for his actions felt like justice, sharp and clean. Evening came. The gown Catherine had chosen was deep emerald silk that brought out the green flecks in Eliza's hazel eyes. It was cut lower than anything she'd worn before, sophisticated rather than demure, the dress of a woman who'd made her choices and owned them. Margaret wore ice blue that made her look ethereal, older than her 19 years, elegant rather than girlish. Adrian, waiting at the bottom of the stairs in full evening dress, stopped mid-motion when he saw Eliza descending. You're staring, she said when she reached him. I'm allowed to stare at my fiancé. His voice was rough. You look scandalous? Magnificent. The Ashford Ball was everything Eliza remembered and dreaded. Hundreds of candles, champagne flowing like water, London's elite packed into ballrooms that glittered with jewels and judgment. The moment they entered, conversation stuttered and stopped, then resumed in furious whispers. Everyone was staring. Eliza felt her courage waver, old instincts screaming at her to hide, to make herself small and apologetic. Adrian must have sensed it because his hand found hers, squeezing gently. Chin up, he murmured. You're a future duchess walking into a room of people who'd kill for that title. Act like it. So she did. She lifted her chin, straightened her spine, and walked into that ballroom like she owned it. The receiving line was brutal. Lord and Lady Ashford greeted them with careful neutrality, too polite to snub a duke, too aware of social currents to offer enthusiastic approval. But then Lady Ashford leaned close to Eliza and whispered, Brave girl. Half these women wish they had your courage. It was the first genuine kindness Eliza had received all day from anyone outside Adrian's circle. The dancing began. Adrian led her onto the floor for a waltz, and suddenly they were the center of attention, every eye tracking their movement. Smile, Adrian said quietly as they turned through the steps, like you haven't a care in the world. I have several dozen cares. I'm counting them right now. His lips twitched. Then at least look like you enjoy being in my arms. That part isn't difficult. They swept through the dance, and slowly Eliza felt something shift. She was good at this. Always had been. The performance of social grace, the careful navigation of etiquette and expectation. She'd spent years perfecting these skills. She just hadn't been using them for herself before, for her own goals, her own future. When the waltz ended, Adrian didn't release her immediately. Instead, he pulled her slightly closer, his voice for her ears alone. You're not alone in this. Remember that. Whatever they say, whatever they think, you have me. You have Margaret and Catherine. You have allies. And enemies. Those too. But the enemies are discovering they picked the wrong battle. As if summoned by the words, Richard appeared at the edge of the ballroom. He looked terrible, disheveled despite expensive clothing, eyes red-rimmed, barely controlled rage radiating from every line of his body. People edged away from him instinctively. Miss Thornfield, his voice carried across the suddenly quiet room. I believe we need to speak. Every muscle in Eliza's body tensed. This was it. The confrontation she'd been dreading. Adrian stepped partially in front of her, protective without being obvious. Hastings, I don't believe you were invited tonight. I don't need an invitation to speak with my fiancé. Former fiancé, Eliza said, stepping around Adrian despite his clear preference that she stay behind him. We have nothing to discuss, Richard. Don't we? He took a step closer, and several people gasped. You made promises. Commitments. You can't just walk away because you've decided you prefer a duke's title to a gentleman's affection. The accusation was calculated, suggesting she'd broken the engagement for status rather than legitimate concerns. Several onlookers nodded slightly, the seed of judgment taking root. I broke our engagement, Eliza said clearly, her voice carrying, because I discovered the truth about your debts and the dangerous people you owe money to. I broke it because I learned you needed my dowry to pay gambling losses of £40,000. I broke it because I refused to spend my life covering up your vices and settling your accounts. The ballroom erupted in shocked whispers. Richard's face went purple. You lying? I'm not lying. I have documentation, witnesses. I visited the Golden Rose myself and overheard your negotiations with creditors. Eliza felt a strange calm settling over her. The same clarity she'd felt breaking the engagement in the first place. You weren't looking for a wife, Richard. You were looking for a solution to problems you created. I refuse to be used that way. You broke your word. You're a liar and a... Choose your next words very carefully, Adrian said softly, but the threat in his tone was unmistakable. You're addressing my future wife, and I have no patience for men who abuse women, financially or otherwise. Richard looked between them, calculating odds and finding them impossible. This isn't over. Yes, Adrian said. It is. And I'd leave now before your creditors arrive looking for you. I believe several were asking after you earlier this evening. It was a lie, probably, but Richard's face went white. He looked around the ballroom at the hundreds of witnesses to his humiliation, and something crumbled in his expression. He fled. The silence that followed his departure was deafening. Then Lady Ashford began to clap, slowly, deliberately. Others joined. Not everyone, but enough. A smattering of applause that grew into genuine support. Well, Catherine said, appearing at Eliza's elbow. I'd say that went rather well. Eliza's legs felt shaky, adrenaline making her hands tremble. She'd just publicly destroyed a man's reputation, aired private financial matters in front of London's elite, and committed social suicide by any traditional measure. But she'd also told the truth, stood up for herself, refused to be the convenient victim of someone else's corruption. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation. Some people avoided them entirely. Others sought them out, offering quiet support or shrewd alliance. The social landscape was shifting, people choosing sides, calculating which position served them best. By midnight, when they finally departed, Eliza felt wrung out and oddly exhilarated. You were brilliant, Margaret said in the carriage home. The way you faced him down, I thought you might actually hit him at one point. I considered it. Adrian, sitting across from them, smiled slightly. I would have allowed it, encouraged it even. Back at the townhouse, Catherine declared herself satisfied with the evening's outcome and retired. Margaret followed soon after, claiming exhaustion, though her eyes sparkled with lingering excitement. Eliza found herself alone with Adrian in his study, both of them still in evening dress, the night's events settling into reality. "It's really happening," she said, accepting the brandy he poured her. "We're actually doing this." Having second thoughts? "No, just processing." She sipped the brandy, letting it burn warmth through her chest. "A week ago, I was engaged to Richard, trying to convince myself I could make it work. Now I'm engaged to you, having publicly humiliated my former fiancé and alienated half of society. Only half. We must be doing something wrong." She laughed despite everything. "How are you so calm about all this?" Adrian settled into the chair beside hers, close enough that their knees almost touched. "I'm not calm. I'm terrified." "You don't look terrified." "I've had more practice hiding it." He set down his own glass, regarding her with that intensity that made her feel seen in ways both thrilling and unsettling. "I'm terrified that you'll wake up tomorrow and realize what you've sacrificed for this. I'm terrified that I've destroyed your life by involving you in my schemes. I'm terrified that you chose me because you had no other options, rather than because you actually want this." "Adrian, but I'm also hopeful, for the first time in years, genuinely hopeful, because you're brave and brilliant and you chose truth over convenience. And that's—" He paused, searching for words. "That's rare. Maybe rarer than either of us realizes." Eliza set down her own glass and moved to stand in front of him, close enough that he had to look up to meet her eyes. "I chose you. Not because I had no other options. You offered me independence with no strings attached. I chose you because I've been half in love with you since I was 17, and fully in love with you since you trusted me enough to warn me about Richard, even though it risked exposing your own feelings." She sank to her knees in front of his chair, taking his hands. "I chose you because you see me as an equal, because you offered partnership instead of ownership, because you understand that sometimes survival means breaking every rule and facing the consequences together." Adrian's control finally cracked. He pulled her up and into his lap, kissing her with desperate intensity, his hands tangling in her carefully arranged hair and destroying Catherine's artistry. Eliza didn't care. She kissed him back just as fiercely, pouring 5 years of longing and 1 week of revolution into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "Fortnight," he murmured. 2 weeks in your mind. Legally, socially, irrevocably. "I'm already yours. The wedding just makes it official." "Then let's make it official tomorrow. We have the special license. We don't need a grand ceremony." Eliza pulled back enough to see his face. "You're serious?" "Completely. Every day we wait is another day for opposition to organize, for your father to scheme, for Richard's family to file legal challenges. Marry me tomorrow, in the chapel here, with just Margaret and Catherine and Whitmore as witnesses. Make it real and final and impossible to undo." It was reckless and impulsive and exactly the kind of decision that would cement their reputations as scandalous rebels. It was perfect. "Tomorrow," Eliza agreed. "Let's do it tomorrow." Adrian kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise. "Tomorrow then, and every day after." Outside the study windows, London slept, unaware that tomorrow morning one of its dukes would quietly marry the woman he'd loved in silence for 5 years. The woman who'd chosen courage over comfort and truth over survival. The scandal would rage for months. The gossip would never entirely fade. Their unconventional beginning would mark them both. But Eliza Thornfield, soon to be Eliza Blackwood, Duchess of Thornhaven, found she didn't care about any of that anymore. She'd survived the fire. She'd emerged from the ashes, and tomorrow she would claim the future she'd chosen with both hands, consequences be damned. And tomorrow she would claim the future she'd chosen with both hands, consequences be damned. Except morning arrived with complications neither of them had anticipated. Eliza woke to urgent knocking at her bedroom door. Margaret burst in before she could respond, still in her nightgown, clutching a newspaper. "You need to see this." The Times had run a front-page story, not society news this time, but actual news. Richard Hastings had been arrested in the early hours of the morning for assault. He'd apparently shown up drunk at his creditor's establishment, demanding more time. and when refused had attacked one of the proprietors with a walking stick. "He's in jail," Margaret said, watching Eliza read. "The magistrate is holding him without bail because the people pressing charges are claiming he's a flight risk." Eliza set down the paper with shaking hands. "Is anyone hurt?" "The man he attacked has a broken arm. Could have been worse. Richard was aiming for his head when others intervened." Margaret sat on the edge of the bed. "This changes things, doesn't it? The wedding plans?" "I don't know. I need to—" Eliza stopped. What did she need to do? Yesterday's plan to marry quietly seemed naive now, with Richard's spectacular self-destruction splashed across the morning papers. She dressed quickly and found Adrian already in his study with Whitmore, both men looking grim. "You've seen the news," Adrian said when she entered. It wasn't a question. "Margaret showed me. What does this mean for us?" "It means," Whitmore said carefully, "that you're now engaged to a duke while your former fiancé sits in prison for violent assault. The optics are complicated." "Complicated how?" Adrian answered. "Some will say you drove him to it, that your broken engagement pushed him over the edge. Others will claim you knew about his violent tendencies and broke the engagement for safety. Both narratives are problematic in different ways." Eliza sank into a chair, exhaustion hitting her like a wave. "There's no way to win, is there? No matter what I do, someone will twist it into something ugly." "Welcome to being a woman in our world," Catherine said from the doorway. She'd clearly just arrived, still removing her gloves. "The rules are rigged against you from birth. The question isn't how to win, it's how to survive with your integrity intact." "Inspiring," Eliza muttered. "Realistic." Catherine settled into a chair with the air of someone preparing for battle. "Now, here's what we're going to do. We proceed with the wedding as planned. Today, private ceremony, no fanfare. But afterward, we don't hide. We face this head on." "How?" Margaret asked. She'd followed Eliza down, hovering in the doorway. "With truth. Uncomfortable, unflattering, complete truth." Catherine looked at each of them in turn. "Eliza will write a statement explaining exactly why she broke the engagement, not vague references to incompatibility or different paths. The real reasons, the debts, the gambling, the evidence she gathered. Make it so detailed, so specific that anyone reading it understands she was escaping danger, not causing it." "That will destroy what's left of Richard's reputation," Whitmore said. "His reputation destroyed itself when he attacked someone with a walking stick." Catherine's tone was sharp. "And frankly, I'm tired of women being expected to protect men's reputations at the cost of their own safety. Publish the truth. Let society decide what to believe." Adrian was quiet, watching Eliza, waiting for her decision. She thought about Richard sitting in a cell, consequences finally catching up to him. She thought about her father, who'd knowingly tried to marry her off to a dangerous man. She thought about all the women in society who'd been taught to stay quiet, to protect men's secrets, to smile through their own destruction. "I'll write it," she said. "Everything. Let them read it and judge however they want. I'm done protecting people who never protected me." Catherine smiled grimly. "Good. Whitmore, you'll help her draft it? Make sure it's legally airtight, can't be used as slander?" "Of course." "Then let's get to work. We have a wedding in—" Catherine checked her watch. 4 hours. Plenty of time to burn down a few reputations first." Writing the statement proved harder than Eliza expected. Not because she lacked material, but because putting it all down in black and white meant facing exactly how bad things had been. How close she'd come to a lifetime of covering up Richard's violence and paying for his mistakes. Whitmore helped her navigate the legal language, turning raw truth into something that couldn't be twisted in court. By noon, they had a document that was devastating in its specificity. "This will cause a sensation," Whitmore warned as he reviewed the final draft. "Once this publishes, there's no taking it back." "Then we'd better make sure I'm married first," Eliza said. "Can't question my credibility as easily once I'm a duchess." "Cynical," Adrian said, but he was almost smiling. "I like it." The wedding preparations were deliberately minimal. Catherine had arranged for a priest, sent word to the chapel, and somehow produced a simple white dress that fit Eliza perfectly. Margaret served as both witness and lady's maid, helping her sister into the gown with trembling fingers. "Are you scared?" Margaret asked as she fastened the buttons. "Terrified, but not of marrying Adrian, of everything else, the statement, the fallout. What happens when Father reads what I've written about him? He'll be furious. Let him be furious. I'm done caring what he thinks. Eliza studied her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed older than 22, harder around the edges, but stronger too. You know you'll be affected by this. My scandal becomes your scandal. Your marriage prospects were never that great to begin with, Margaret interrupted. And honestly, after watching what you've been through, I'm not sure I want marriage the way society offers it. Maybe there's another path. Maybe I'll find my own revolution. You're 17, 19, and old enough to know that staying quiet and obedient gets women nowhere good. Margaret finished the last button and stepped back. There. You look perfect. Like a bride who knows exactly what she's doing. I have no idea what I'm doing. Even better, means you can make it up as you go. The chapel was small, private, tucked into the back of Adrian's property. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, painting the stone floor in colors that shifted as clouds passed overhead. Adrian waited at the altar with Whitmore and the priest, looking uncomfortable in formal mourning dress. His eyes went wide when he saw Eliza, and whatever he'd been about to say died unuttered. You're staring again, Eliza said as she reached him. Still allowed to stare. More so now, actually. His voice was rough. You're sure about this? Are you? Absolutely terrified and completely certain. You? Same? The ceremony was brief, almost perfunctory. No grand speeches or elaborate vows, just the essential words that bound them legally, socially, irrevocably. When the priest pronounced them married, Adrian kissed her with a gentleness that contrasted with his usual intensity. There, he said against her lips. Done. You're stuck with me now. Seems like you're stuck with me too. Best decision I ever made. They signed the documents. Catherine and Margaret added their signatures as witnesses, and just like that, Eliza Thornfield became Eliza Blackwood, Duchess of Thornhaven. Now comes the hard part, Catherine said as they walked back to the main house, facing the world as a united front. The statement was delivered to every major newspaper in London by 4 o'clock. Whitmore had included a cover letter explaining that the new Duchess of Thornhaven wished to set the record straight regarding her former engagement, given recent events. By 6 o'clock, the first responses started arriving. Some were supportive, women writing to thank Eliza for speaking publicly about what many suffered privately. Others were vicious, society matrons declaring her ungrateful, attention-seeking, a traitor to her class for airing such dirty laundry. And at 7 o'clock, her father arrived. Henshaw announced him with visible reluctance. Lord Thornfield is here, Your Grace. He's demanding to see the Duchess. Adrian's expression went cold. Tell him, I'll see him, Eliza interrupted. She stood, smoothing her dress. She'd changed out of the wedding gown into something more practical, but she was still clearly dressed as a bride. He came all this way. Least I can do is let him yell at me in person. I'm coming with you, Adrian said. So am I, Margaret added. They found Lord Thornfield in the front parlor, pacing like a caged animal. He turned when they entered, his face purple with rage. You ungrateful wretch! After everything you've done? Eliza's voice was ice. You mean after you tried to sell me to cover your gambling debts? After you attempted to have me declared insane when I objected? After you knowingly pushed me toward a violent man because his family's money was more important than my safety? I protected this family. Everything I did was to preserve our name, our position. You protected yourself, your position, your comfort. Eliza stepped closer, Margaret a solid presence at her shoulder. And you destroyed everything else in the process. Lord Thornfield's gaze swung to Adrian. You orchestrated this, poisoned my daughter against me, stole her away. I gave her information and options, Adrian said coldly. She made her own choices, something you never allowed her to do. Choices? She's 22 years old. She has no idea what she's thrown away. I'm standing right here, Father. Eliza's voice cut through his rant. And I know exactly what I threw away. A lifetime of being used as currency in your business dealings. A marriage to a man who would have destroyed me. The privilege of staying silent while people like you and Richard ruin lives without consequences. That statement you published, it's slander. I'll sue. I'll drag you through every court. It's not slander if it's true. Whitmore appeared in the doorway, document case in hand. And I have documentation proving every claim the Duchess made, bank records, witness testimonies, sworn affidavits. Please, Lord Thornfield, do sue. I'd enjoy demolishing your case publicly. Lord Thornfield looked between them, finally understanding he was outmatched. His shoulders slumped. You've destroyed us, he said quietly. The scandal, the shame, your mother is devastated. Margaret's prospects are ruined. The Thornfield name is mud. Then perhaps you should have thought of that before trying to sacrifice your daughter to save yourself. Eliza felt no pity, no regret, just cold clarity. You made your choices, Father. Now live with them. You're no daughter of mine. You said that yesterday, too. It still doesn't hurt as much as you want it to. He left without another word, and Eliza waited until she heard the front door slam before her knees buckled. Adrian caught her, easing her into a chair. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, Margaret said, her voice shaking. That was necessity, Eliza corrected. Bravery implies I had a choice. You did have a choice, Adrian said quietly. You could have stayed silent, accepted your fate. Thousands of women do, every day. You chose to fight back instead. The evening brought more responses to the published statement. The scandal sheets ran with it naturally, some spinning it as a tragic tale of a woman escaping danger, others painting Eliza as a calculating social climber who'd manufactured crisis to land a duke. But something unexpected happened too. Other women started coming forward. By morning, 3 more women had published their own statements about Richard Hastings. Inappropriate advances at parties. Gambling debts settled by pressuring their fathers. One particularly damning account from a maid he'd assaulted and paid off to stay quiet. It's a movement, Catherine observed, reading the papers over breakfast. You opened the door. Others are walking through it. I just told the truth about my own experience, Eliza said. That's how revolutions start. One person refuses to stay silent, then another, until the whole structure built on silence and shame comes crashing down. The legal consequences for Richard mounted throughout the week. The assault charges were just the beginning. With Eliza's statement published and other women coming forward, magistrates started investigating his other activities. The gambling debts, the predatory behavior, the financial schemes that had bordered on fraud. Within 10 days of Eliza's wedding, Richard Hastings was facing multiple criminal charges and social exile. His family, desperate to salvage something, publicly disowned him and settled with his creditors to avoid their own ruin. He did this to himself, Adrian said when word reached them of Richard's complete downfall. You just stopped protecting him from the consequences. I know, but it's still strange watching someone's life implode. Is it imploding, or is the truth just finally catching up? Fair question. The social fallout was complicated. Some doors closed to the new Duchess of Thornhaven, but others opened. Women who'd suffered similar treatment reached out, forging connections built on shared experience rather than shallow social climbing. Margaret threw herself into organizing what she called strategic rebellion, using her social connections to support women in difficult situations, quietly helping them escape bad engagements or abusive households. At 19, she became a force of nature. You inspired this, she told Eliza one afternoon as they reviewed requests for help. Showed me that refusing to be convenient could actually change things. I just wanted to survive. Survival is revolutionary when the system expects your sacrifice. 3 months after the wedding, Eliza and Adrian hosted their first official event as a married couple, a ball that would either cement their place in society or confirm their exile from it. The response was overwhelming. Over 300 acceptances, far more than the ballroom could comfortably hold. They're curious, Catherine explained as they planned the evening. Want to see if you'll crumble under scrutiny or thrive despite it. Show them thriving. The night of the ball, Eliza dressed in deep sapphire silk, Adrian's family diamonds at her throat, a visible claim of belonging, of permanence. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. 3 months ago, she'd been drowning in her father's machinations and Richard's corruption. Now she was a duchess, hostess of one of the season's major events, married to a man who treated her as an equal. You're thinking too hard, Adrian said from the doorway. I can see the wheels turning. Just wondering if I'll wake up tomorrow and find this was all some elaborate dream. If it is, We're sharing it." He crossed to stand behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. In the mirror, they looked right together, matched in determination if not in temperament. Ready to face the masses? No. Let's do it anyway. The ballroom glittered with candles and flowers, champagne and crystal, all the trappings of wealth and status that Eliza had been raised to value above all else. But tonight it felt different, like a tool she could wield rather than a cage she inhabited. Guests arrived in waves. Some approached with genuine warmth, others with calculating interest, wanting to align themselves with power. A few brave souls offered barely concealed judgment, testing whether the new Duchess would tolerate criticism. Eliza navigated it all with the skills she'd honed over 22 years, but with a new edge. She didn't apologize for her choices, didn't soften her truths to make others comfortable. When Lady Morrison made a pointed comment about hasty marriages and scandal, Eliza smiled sweetly and responded that she preferred honest scandal to dishonest respectability. The conversation around them faltered, then resumed with new energy. People were watching, recalibrating, understanding that this Duchess wouldn't be managed or controlled. Midway through the evening, an unexpected guest arrived. Thomas Hastings stood in the entrance, looking young and uncertain in formal dress. Henshaw announced him with visible confusion. The Hastings family had been notably absent from the invitation list. Eliza felt Adrian tense beside her as Thomas approached. "Your Grace, Duchess." Thomas bowed awkwardly. "I apologize for arriving uninvited. I needed to speak with you both, to thank you." "Thank us?" Eliza couldn't hide her surprise. "For stopping the wedding, for exposing Richard's behavior." Thomas's voice was low, meant only for them. "I tried to warn you, but I was too afraid to say everything. After your statement published and other women came forward, I realized how many people Richard had hurt. How many more he would have hurt if he'd continued unchallenged." "Your brother is facing serious charges," Adrian said carefully. "I know, and he deserves them. What he did to those women, to you, Duchess, it was wrong. My family wants to pretend it never happened, bury it in silence. But I needed you to know that at least one Hastings understands what you did, took courage." Thomas left shortly after, but his words stayed with Eliza through the rest of the evening. Maybe this was how change happened, not in grand gestures, but in quiet acknowledgments, one person at a time deciding that the old ways didn't have to be the only ways. As the ball wound down and guests began departing, Eliza found a moment of quiet on the terrace. London sparkled below, gas lamps glowing like scattered stars. "You looked happy in there," Adrian said, joining her. "Triumphant, even." "I felt powerful. Is that terrible?" "It's honest." He leaned against the railing beside her. 3 months ago, you were convinced your only value was in being convenient for other people. Now you're hosting balls and changing social narratives and generally terrifying the establishment. I'd say that's worth feeling powerful about. "Oh, we're still scandalous. People still whisper." "Let them whisper. We have something better than their approval." "What's that?" "Each other. Truth. The freedom to build something real instead of performing something hollow." Adrian turned to face her fully. "I won't lie and say this path is easy. Society has long memories. Your father may never forgive you. Richard's downfall will always be connected to your name." "I know. But you're not alone in it. You have me, Margaret, Catherine, every woman who found the courage to speak up because you did. That's not nothing." Eliza looked at her husband. This man who'd watched her from a distance for years before finally risking everything to pull her from drowning. "Do you ever regret it? Taking me in, marrying me so quickly, all the complications I brought with me?" "Never." No hesitation. "You're the best chaos that ever happened to my carefully controlled life." She laughed despite everything. "I'm chaos now?" "Controlled chaos. The productive kind." He pulled her close, voice dropping to something private. "You remade yourself in fire, Eliza. Burned away everything that wasn't essential and emerged stronger. That's not scandal. That's revolution." The word echoed in her mind as they stood together under London's night sky, the remnants of their successful ball fading behind them. Revolution. Maybe that's what this had been all along. Not just one woman escaping a bad marriage, but a challenge to the entire system that treated women as currency. A refusal to stay silent when silence meant complicity. The following months proved Adrian right about society's long memory. Some doors remained closed, some invitations never came, but other opportunities opened. Women seeking advice, younger girls looking for examples of different paths, even a few men starting to question the systems that had served them so well. Margaret became a force in her own right, eventually founding a discreet organization that helped women escape dangerous situations. She never married, declaring she preferred revolution to romance. Catherine continued hosting the most interesting salon in London, where unconventional ideas and uncomfortable truths were discussed over tea and sharp commentary. And Eliza settled into her role as Duchess with the same fierce determination she'd brought to everything else. She used her position to support women's education, to question inheritance laws that disadvantaged daughters, to speak uncomfortable truths at social gatherings where silence was expected. Not everyone approved. Her father never spoke to her again, dying 5 years later without reconciliation. Richard served time in prison and emerged a broken man, eventually leaving England entirely. The Thornfield family name never fully recovered from the scandal. But in the quiet moments, when Eliza walked through her gardens or sat reading in the library where she'd once found Adrian watching her from across crowded rooms, she felt no regret. She'd chosen truth over convenience, courage over comfort, partnership over possession. And she'd survived. Not just survived, but thrived in ways that would have seemed impossible from that first night standing in a ballroom, watching her future being decided by men who saw her as a solution to their problems rather than a person with her own desires. One evening, years after that first revolution, Eliza found herself in Adrian's study. He was reviewing correspondence, she was reading, and the comfortable silence between them felt like its own kind of conversation. "Do you remember," she said suddenly, "that night in the ballroom when you first warned me about Richard? You said I was good at pretending, at seeing everything and revealing nothing." Adrian looked up from his papers. "I remember. I've been thinking about that, about how much energy I spent hiding, performing, pretending to be smaller than I was so I wouldn't threaten anyone. And now? Now I'm too tired to pretend, and too aware that pretending protects the wrong people." She set down her book. The young women who come to Margaret's organization, the ones looking for ways out of impossible situations, they're all good at pretending too. We teach them survival through performance, but performance isn't living. What would you tell them instead? Eliza considered the question. That sometimes survival means burning down everything you were taught to value. That choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. That the people who call you ungrateful for refusing to be sacrificed were never grateful for your sacrifice in the first place. That's not a particularly comforting message. Comfort is overrated. Truth is better. Adrian smiled, the rare, genuine expression that still made her heart skip. There's the woman I married, revolutionary to the core. You made me this way. No, I just gave you permission to be what you already were. The rest was all you. Outside the study windows, London continued its eternal performance. Carriages rattling past, gas lamps glowing, society maintaining its careful facades. But inside this room, in this moment, Eliza felt the quiet satisfaction of having chosen authenticity over appearance. She'd been the quiet girl who learned to hide her sharp mind and sharper observations. Then she'd been the rebel who refused her assigned fate. Now she was simply herself, complex, flawed, powerful in ways that had nothing to do with her title and everything to do with her choices. The world still whispered about the Duchess of Thornhaven, who'd published that devastating statement about her former fiancé. They still speculated about the hasty marriage and the family estrangement and all the scandal that surrounded her name. Let them whisper. Eliza had something better than their approval. She had truth. She had freedom. She had a partnership built on equality and respect, and the kind of love that came from truly seeing another person and choosing them anyway. And most importantly, she had herself, reclaimed, remade, no longer willing to be convenient for anyone except on her own terms. That night, as she prepared for bed, Eliza caught her reflection in the mirror and thought about the terrified woman who'd stood in a museum 3 months ago, deciding whether to trust a duke's warning or her family's plans. She'd chosen trust, chosen truth, chosen the hard path of authenticity over the easy road of obedience. And in doing so, she'd proven something society desperately needed to learn, that women were not currency to be traded, not problems to be solved, not decorative additions to men's ambitions. They were people. Complex, capable, deserving of choice. The revolution hadn't ended with Eliza's escape from Richard Hastings. It had just begun. Every woman who found the courage to speak up, every girl who learned she could choose differently, every man who started questioning the systems that had served him, they were all part of something larger. And it had started with one quiet woman in a ruthless society, deciding that survival was worth more than status, and that truth, however costly, was always worth the price. Adrian found her still standing at the mirror, lost in thought. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. Eliza turned to face him, this man who'd risked everything to help her escape, who'd offered partnership when others offered ownership, who'd seen her potential when even she'd forgotten it existed. "Not one," she said, "not a single one." And she meant it. Because sometimes the greatest victory wasn't winning according to someone else's rules. It was rewriting the rules entirely, building something new from the ashes of what should have destroyed you, and emerging stronger for having survived the fire. Eliza Blackwood, Duchess of Thornhaven, had done exactly that, and she was just getting started.